Good afternoon, fellow scholars and friends of Harvard University. We're pleased to welcome today the chairman of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee and Secretary General of the European Council, Mr. Thorbjørn Jagland. This journey began over a year ago when I met Mr. Jagland at the Nobel Peace Prize ceremonies in Oslo, Norway, at the time of his presentation of the Nobel Peace Prize to President Barack Obama. On that occasion, and at subsequent occasions at a banquet for President Obama, I invited Mr. Jagland to visit Harvard University as guest of our students and our faculty. Mr. Jagland graciously accepted my invitation. Upon my return to the university, I approached my colleague and good friend, Mr. Steve Bloomfield, Executive Director of the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs, and requested that we collaborate on extending an invitation to Secretary General Jagland to have him deliver the Jodidi Lecture. Steve Bloomfield welcomed this collaboration, and he is one who has given us excellent leadership in international affairs through this very fine institution. The Samuel L. and Elizabeth Jodidi Lecture is among the most prominent annual lecture series of the Weatherhead Center and one of the most distinguished at the university. Established in 1955, this lecture series provides for the, quote, delivery of lectures by eminent and qualified persons for whom the promotion of tolerance, understanding, goodwill among nations, and peace of the world is a priority. Our guest today totally personifies the values and pursuits of this mission. Mr. Thorbjørn Jagland is chairman of the Norwegian Nobel Peace Prize Committee and again Secretary General of the Council of Europe since 2009. He was also president of the Storting, the Norwegian Parliament, from 2005 to 2009. He has held two of the most influential government positions in Norway, Prime Minister from 1996 to 1997, and Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2000 to 2001. After serving as Foreign Minister, he was chairman of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and the Enlarged Foreign Affairs Committee in the Storting for 4 years, 2001 to 2005. He has served as chairman of the EEA Consultative Commission during this period from 2000 to 2005, and in addition, he has held a number of other parliamentary positions, such as head of the Storting's Delegation for Relations with the European Parliament for 6 years. He was a member of the Storting for 15 years. Mr. Jagland was a leader of the Norwegian Labour Party for 10 years, 1992 to 2002, and party secretary of the Labour Party for 5 years, 1987 to 1992. He is currently chairman of the board of directors at the Oslo Center for Peace and Human Rights and member of the International Board of Governors at the Perez Center for Peace. He served as vice president of the Socialist International from 1999 to 2008 and chairman of the Social International Middle East Committee from 2000 to 2006. He was a member of the Sharm el-Sheikh Fact-Finding Commission, the Mitchell Commission it's called, from 2000 to 2001. Over the last 20 years, Mr. Jagland has published widely on a range of issues, in particular on European international affairs. He has published 4 books in Norway: My European Dream, published in 1990, Letters in 1995, Our Vulnerable World in 2001, and 10 theses on the EU and Norway in 2003. He holds a degree in economics from the University of Oslo, which he received in 1975. And he is married to Hanne Grotsjord, and they have 2 children. Ms. Grotsjord, will you be recognized, please? Stand. Let's welcome Ms. Grotsjord as well. It is my honor to present to you Secretary General Thorbjørn Jagland of Norway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Executive Director of the Weatherhead Center, Mr. Stephen Bloomfield, Director of the Harvard Foundation, my friend, Dr. Alan Counter, distinguished scholars, dear students. I'm great honored to have been invited to give this lecture. at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University, an institution that has contributed so much to progress, enlightenment, and to a civilized world. So it is a great honor for me to give you some of my views, having two hats on me, one as Secretary General of the Council of Europe and also as the Chairman of the Norwegian Nobel Peace Prize Committee. Well, I said that I wanted to talk about human rights in international politics, or individual human rights and universal peace. It is a broad issue, of course, and I recall what the George Bernard Shaw, the famous Irish writer, once said, that he was chairing a panel and he gave the floor to a parliamentarian and he said, you have only 10 minutes. And then the parliamentarian said, oh, how can I tell everything I know in 10 minutes? And then George Bernard Shaw said, I advise you to speak slowly. Well, I will keep on for a little bit more than 15 minutes, but I will not keep you as long as party secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. For the first time he spoke in an audience outside China, and he thought he could speak as long as he did back home. So he kept on for 2 hours, but the people started to leave while he was speaking. And when he finished, then there was only one man left in the room, and this man, he went down to him and said, oh, I appreciate very much that you stayed while I was speaking. And then he replied, well, I had to because I'm speaking after you. Well, some words about the Norwegian Nobel Committee. That is awarding the Nobel Peace Prize every year. And I want to use this year's prize to Liu Xiaobo, as well as the one last year to President Barack Obama, to explain the will of Alfred Nobel and the philosophy of the committee. My second capacity is, as I said, Secretary General of the Council of Europe. This is the oldest European institution which Winston Churchill took the initiative to form after the Second World War back in 1949. It was a consequence of the war in Europe. And the purpose of this organization was to work to build the peace in Europe based on human rights, rule of law, and democracy. And the work of this organization is based on the European Convention on Human Rights and 200 other conventions. And actually, this is the only concrete, serious follow-up of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because we have built a huge machinery in Strasbourg in order to see to it that the member countries, the 47 member countries in Europe, are upholding their obligations under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights with monitoring bodies, and at the top of this, the Court of Human Rights, which is unprecedented in history, because 800 million people on the European continent today can bring their application to this court if they believe that their domestic authorities have violated the European Convention on Human Rights. And indeed, thousands of people do that every year. 50,000 applications came to the court last year only. So this is unprecedented in history, and it came because of the awful wars that we had in Europe. And what happened in Europe was a total breakdown of human rights, which paved the way for the Nazi regime, and we had to bear the consequences, everybody on the European continent. That is why we have built the new Europe. But before going into all this, let me first recall the historical facts behind the Nobel Peace Prize. The Swedish chemist, engineer, and armaments manufacturer Alfred Nobel wrote in his will in 1895 that the interest from his estate should be divided into 5 parts. 4 would go to the fields of physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, while the 5th part would go to the person, and I quote, who had done the most or the best work for fraternity between nations, for the abolition or reduction of standing armies, and for the holding and promotion of peace congresses. Nobel had at the end of his life become frightened by the destructive consequences of his invention of dynamite could have. He now wanted to ensure that the wealth he attained was used for humanitarian and scientific purposes and for promoting peace worldwide. As you know, the first 4 prizes are awarded by the Nobel Committee in Stockholm in Sweden. However, the 5th prize, the Peace Prize, Nobel had decided that it should be awarded by a committee of 5 persons elected by the Norwegian Parliament. Today, after 104 prizes, one can read in the Oxford Dictionary of 20th Century World Peace that the Nobel Peace Prize is the world's most prestigious prize, although, as it says, it competes in a market of many peace prizes. I believe that the main reason for this is the CV of the Peace Prize. There have certainly been controversial winners, and there have been those who never became winners but should have been winners. However, the different winners throughout the years reflect the fact that the committee has adapted to changes in international politics and to factors influencing peace. And I will add, the prize winners reflect the strengths of universal liberal values and a typical Scandinavian mixture of idealism and realism that makes up our approach to international politics. By the way, one of the Peace Prize winners, Fridtjof Nansen, a Norwegian, one of the most famous Norwegians during all times. He got the prize because of his humanitarian work in Russia. As you may know, he was the first to try to reach the North Pole by skiing. And he was also a very pragmatic man. And what I tell you now is to give you an idea of the pragmatism which we have in the north, in the Scandinavia. During winter, most of the Norwegians like to go skiing. But many also like to go to churches, of course. So there is a dilemma. Should you go to church or should you go skiing? And Nansen, he invented the following solution to this dilemma. He said that it is better to go skiing and think of God than to go skiing and to go to church and think of skiing. The concept of peace has changed fundamentally since 1901. The meaning, for instance, of fraternity among nations, abolition or reduction of standing armies, and promotion of peace congresses, which Alfred Nobel talked about, must be interpreted quite differently than at the beginning of the 20th century. So what should the point of departure be for understanding peace? What should peace be measured against? I would say that we should look at the moments in history when declarations formed the world and our understanding of man and society. These declarations have formed our thinking, and they have formed our actions and ways to peace. The most notable of them, the American Declaration of Independence from 1776, and the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen from 1789, redefine civic identity fundamentally. All men are born free and have equal rights. In that time, it was a revolution. But the declarations also changed the nature of the nation-state. They strengthened the national identity, which of course was very good. However, this also opened up for unintentional excesses of nationalism, which was certainly bad. No longer was combat and war an enterprise for the elite. Whole populations could be mobilized for wars, their wars. And this ideological transformation occurred just as technological innovations made mass destruction possible. This is why the two 18th century declarations were followed by a third, namely the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This time a revolution toward not a revolution towards nationalism, but away from it, towards internationalism. So the years 1776, 1789, and 1948, when the UN was formed and the Universal Declaration was adopted, marked leaps forward in the human project. Ideals of justice and equality were advanced. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood, states Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In 1966, the United Nations General Assembly adopted another milestone, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, stating, among others, that everyone shall have the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of any frontiers. These documents have paved the way for a new civic identity and a new world order, associating ourselves with the fate of other people, using our freedom to make other people free, using our freedom to make war impossible, to combat global warming, and to make markets and money responsible. And other global challenges that we have today. So the lessons of war, and especially the founding of the United Nations and the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, became a new cornerstone for the world. And it is very important to understand the following, namely, that no nation has unlimited sovereignty any longer. They have certain obligations that they have to uphold. And equally important, the majority or the people in any country does not have unlimited power. The majority cannot do everything they want. They are restrained by the universal rights. So when we have said that democracy is majority rule, well, it's true, but it's also true that the majority is being restrained by the universal rights. So one can say that we live in constitutional democracy because the laws and international regulations are constituting the limits of power for the nation states and the limits of power for the majority inside the nation states. This is the world order that we have today. Former Secretary General of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld, once said that the UN was not created to take humanity to heaven, but to save it from hell. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights established the moral basis on how we should relate to one another. It has been further developed by the world community, but it does not take us to heaven. What it does do is to form a basis for making societies more human and civilized and move toward brotherhood between nations that Alfred Nobel wrote in his will. At the same time, the structures put in place after the Second World War were not negligent of the power realities of the world. Realpolitik, which I say in Germany, were at the heart of the UN Charter as well, establishing the Security Council, and as all of you know, power politics continue to dominate the world. So power politics will always be part of our understanding of peace, but our moral reference against which to weigh any measurement of peace will always be human rights, how they are upheld and how they are violated. That is also why the Nobel Committee has awarded the prize to practitioners of realpolitik, such as Willy Brandt and Henry Kissinger. Last year it went to President Barack Obama. Such choices have often been controversial, but it is also necessary to demonstrate that those are in charge of politics every day also have to contribute to the change of the world. We cannot only have idealism, we also need to have pragmatism. As President Obama tried from the very first moment to create a new climate in international politics, he is a rare example of the multitude of forces of peace in our time and the important role played by political leaders. He tried from the very first moment to change the mood and the situation in the world. Multilateral diplomacy has, due to his effort, regained a central position. Emphasis has been put on the role that the United Nations and other international institutions can play. Equally important, Obama reached out to the Muslim world, addressing audiences in Cairo, Turkey, and recently in Indonesia, which has the world's largest Muslim population, about the need for coexistence and cooperation. As former Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, David Miliband, recently stated, in his first year, President Obama made the rebuilding of America's reputation and partnerships with the Islamic world a central theme of his presidency. And it is true. This is what Alfred Nobel wrote in his will, Brotherhood Between Nations. Obama has been trying to reach out to other people and to say clearly that we want to work with you. Of course, results do not come easy, but should we have preferred the alternative? Recall what was the situation. We had confrontations on all fronts in the world. Obama furthermore re-energized disarmament and arms control negotiations. He reached out to the Russians, offering to change the plans for missile defense over Europe. The Russians had said that they didn't want to come to the table to negotiate about the nuclear strategic arms before they could have talks on the missile defense or included in the negotiations. On the 8th of April this year, his efforts were crowned when he signed the New START Treaty in Prague with President Medvedev. He has brought new hope to the vision of a world free from nuclear arms. And that is what Alfred Nobel wrote about in his will. He said that the prize should go to the person that had worked for reduction of standing armies. Standing armies at the time was, of course, the most important thing in the military. But today, the nuclear armaments and technologies linked to it is today's standing armies, or what we have to talk about if we are to reduce armaments in the world. Obama also immediately launched new efforts to make the peace negotiations in the Middle East move forward. No American president has done that during his first year in office. To get the adversaries to sit around the table is in today's world what Alfred Nobel called convening peace congresses. The turn of the 18th and 19th century, peace congresses were very important. Today we don't have these huge peace congresses, but peace congresses in today's meaning is, of course, to get people to sit around the table. So each of these actions alone would have been reason enough to award Obama the Peace Prize, but he carried it all. As former Peace Prize laureate Desmond Tutu said, and I quote, "Obama lowered the temperature in the world. We are approaching the boiling point with conflicts on all arenas. Today, the world has calmed down and the powers are talking." Of course, in American politics, achievements in foreign policy does not necessarily bring victory on election day. But Obama captured the world's attention and gave its people hope for a better future. Looking back over the years, the most honorable part of the committee's history is maybe the one that has provoked the greatest outrage among certain governments: prizes awarded to human rights activists. It was heavily debated in 1935 when the committee awarded the prize to the German pacifist and opposition figure, Karl von Ossietzky. 2 members of the committee left the committee, among others the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs. And His Majesty the King, he didn't appear in the ceremony, so it was highly controversial. Hitler, of course, was even more outraged. Ossietzky was denied permission to go to Oslo and later died in the concentration camp. But today we can say, if Europe had stood up against Hitler, as Ossietzky did, we could have avoided the Second World War and the concentration camps. It wasn't good either that the lawyer who came to Oslo representing Ossietzky and was given the diploma and the money, he ran off with the whole thing. That is, among other things, why we don't want to have others to come to Oslo to receive the prize, other than Liu Xiaobo or his wife. Well, it didn't go well in Moscow either when Andrei Sakharov was awarded the prize in 1975. He had to send his wife to receive the prize. Likewise, in 1983, when Lech Walesa was awarded the prize. The Burmese authorities were no less furious when Aung San Suu Kyi received the prize in 1991. She could not go to Oslo either, but had to send her sons and husband. But look at the situation. Because she got the prize, the world attention to her situation has been there during all these years since 1991. Some days ago, she was released. Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, called me 1 hour ago and said that he had been on the phone with Aung San Suu Kyi, and she said that she wanted to travel to Oslo to give her lecture as soon as possible, provided she will be able to return. And I believe that if we keep the attention of the situation within Burma, this prize will also have an enormous impact on the situation in that country as well as in the region. The committee's choice to award the prize to South African Albert Luthuli in 1960 and Desmond Tutu in 1984 caused heavy criticism from the authorities. However, the peace prizes to Nelson Mandela and Frederick de Klerk in 1993 were greatly applauded because time had changed. I say this because the crucial relation between human rights and peace is generally accepted today. Democracies rarely, if ever, wage war on one another. Of course, the definition of democracy and war can be discussed, but respect for human rights, democracy, and the rule of law is a fundamental prerequisite for any society and for peace in the world. Fraternity between nations, which Alfred Nobel refers to in his will, can hardly exist without human rights and democracy. So, dear friends, what is the dominant force of the 21st century? In a bright picture, it could, until recently, have been the global economy, but it could also be information technology, or the scientific revolution, or the advance of democracy and diversity. In a dark picture, it could be climate change, continuing poverty, or conflicts caused by racial and religious tensions. All these are important factors to our understanding of the new century we have entered. They all reflect one fundamental thing. The 21st century is a century more than anything, characterized by an unprecedented degree of interdependence among nations. Globalization simply means that we have more trade, more travel, more communication, and more exchange than ever before. People experience more and benefits more than ever before in history. But at the same time, we have become more vulnerable. Look at the financial crisis. Within weeks, the impact of the meltdown of investment banks in the US had become hard realities all over the world. On the question of security, the free flow of people, information and goods across borders and waters means that threats are being spread by other means and with other intentions that we are used to. Globalization has become the frame for a world system where all pieces are more or less dependent on one another. Globalization gives birth to new great powers. New state actors are changing the rules of the game, and new non-state actors are entering the stage as well. Now, what do we do with all these challenges? One thing is clear, we have to keep our mind open. Or as Dr. Albert Einstein once said, that our mind is as a parachute. It doesn't work if it is closed. So we have to be open for what is happening out there and to understand that the world is changing. And to be clear, in this globalized world, national sovereignty cannot be absolute. The threatening catastrophe of ecological ruin and the free but amoral markets we are witnessing today contribute to the awareness that we must build stronger global institutions and that we must transfer more national sovereignty to them. But first and foremost, all powers, old and new, must unite around the universality of human rights. This is the point of departure. And now I come to this year's Nobel Peace Prize, namely the one to Liu Xiaobo. We have all seen China's enormous economic advances. The country is the world's second largest economy. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty. Scope for political participation has also broadened. But China's new status must entail increased responsibility. As we criticize the United States for the Vietnam War, for the lack of civil rights for Afro-Americans, we must criticize China for its breach of several international agreements to which it is a signatory, as well as of its own provisions concerning political rights. Keep in mind that China has adopted both the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights that I have referred to earlier. And looking at China's constitution, Article 35 lays down that, and I quote, citizens of the People's Republic of China enjoy freedom of speech, of the press, of assembly, of association, of procession, and of demonstration. But in practice, these freedoms have proved to be distinctly curtailed for China's citizens. And according to the verdict from the highest court in China about Liu Xiaobo, this is very clear. The verdict says the following: Liu Xiaobo has used internet with the intention to overthrowing the state power and socialist system of our country's people's democratic dictatorship. This is, well, one could refer to what Foreign Minister Molotov, who was Foreign Minister under Stalin, he said to Stalin once that the problem with democratic elections are that we don't know who is going to win. And then Stalin replied, "Oh, take it easy. I'm counting the votes." but in a democratic society, you have the right to call for a change in system as well as in political practice. So if the Chinese claim to have adopted democratic rights in their constitution, how can it be a crime to speak out against the socialist system and people's democratic dictatorship? So clearly, China's criminal law is not in accordance with the Universal Declaration or in accordance with China's own constitution. So when the Norwegian Nobel Committee decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2010 to Liu Xiaobo for his long and non-violent struggle for fundamental rights in China, we took all of this into consideration. There is a close and crucial connection between human rights and peace. The human rights are a prerequisite for the fraternity between nations, of which Alfred Nobel wrote in his will, and that China, as a new global power, must be judged by the same standards as we judge ourselves when it comes to its responsibility as a member of the world community. We recognize, of course, that transition to democracy and rule of law has to be a slow process. Adam Michnik, he once said that the worst thing with communism is what comes after. And we saw that, of course, in the Soviet Union and all over Eastern Europe, that the difficult times came when they transformed the system from communism to democracy, but it is unavoidable. And it is important also to know that there are a lot of problems in China with poverty still, with corruption, with mismanagement. All these things cannot be dealt with without the freedom of expression, without the free press, without the checks and balances in the political system. When the Nobel Committee has been accused of interfering in China's internal affairs, well, when Dr. Martin Luther King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, many groups in the US reacted negatively. When Sakharov was awarded the prize, the criticism of the Soviet Union was immense against the committee. I'd say this because as a global power, China must be prepared for criticism in the years ahead. It is a price to be paid for being a prominent member of the world community. The campaign to establish universal human rights also in China is being waged by many Chinese, both in China itself and abroad. However, through the severe punishment meted out to him, Liu has become the foremost symbol of this wide-ranging struggle for human rights in China. For over 2 decades, Liu Xiaobo has been a strong spokesman for the application of fundamental human rights also in China. He took a part in the Tiananmen protest in 1989. He was a leading author behind the Charter 08, the Manifesto of Such Rights in China, which was published on the 60th anniversary of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights on December 10, 2008. The following year, Liu was sentenced to 11 years in prison and 2 years deprivation of political rights for inciting, as I said, subversion of state power, the socialist system, and people's democratic dictatorship. Liu has consistently maintained that the sentence violates both China's own constitution and fundamental human rights. He should therefore be set free. Dear friends, for the past 100 years, human rights and democracy have spread throughout the world. Today, it is no longer limited to the so-called Western world. A number of important Muslim countries follow the principle of democracy. For instance, Turkey, Indonesia, and Malaysia. Turkey is a member of the Council of Europe, which I've referred to. And as Secretary General of this organization, I know from first-hand experience that Turkey is steadily developing methods and are going towards modern democracy with respect for human rights and the rule of law. Our Court of Human Rights, along with our monitoring bodies, are continuously scrutinizing Turkey, and they appreciate it. So it proves that it is possible to reconcile democracy and Islam as well. Democracy does not need to follow one single recipe. National culture will always affect the state system, but respect for fundamental human rights is essential because they are the route to any lasting peace. The American academic Francis Fukuyama became famous for his book The End of History and The Last Man. But the fall of the Berlin Wall 20 years ago was not the end of history. And he didn't claim that. Actually, what Fukuyama said was that since the French Revolution, democracy has time and again proven to be a fundamentally better political system than any other alternative. He's right. History has proven that in the long run, only democracies can respect and ensure the rights of the individual, and only democracy can be the point of departure for lasting peace. Isaac Newton once said that if I've seen further, it is because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. Today, if we are able to see further, it is because we are standing on the shoulders of the many brave Peace Prize winners, men and women, who during their time and often at great risk have stood up for their beliefs, have stood up for our rights, and have made our freedom possible. We owe it to the future generation to continue this bravery and fight for individual human rights and universal peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary General Jagland. I did not introduce myself. I'm Dr. Alan Counter, Director of the Harvard Foundation and Professor of Neurology here. And Steve Bloomfield and I would welcome your questions at this time to our guest of honor. So I think there's a microphone available. And is there one? And you'll pass it around. There are a couple of microphones. So we would welcome your questions at this time to Secretary General Jagland. So who would like to ask the first question? Is there someone here? Is there anyone who'd like to start? Always in the scholarly community there are questions. There's one back here. So introduce yourself. Just say.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Secretary General. My name is Paul LaRue. I'm a freshman at Harvard College. Last week when he was in India, President Obama said that he would back the Indians' effort to get a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. How do you think international organizations are going to change in the next decade or so to reflect growing world powers?
I think that the global organizations have to adapt to the new realities of the world. The United Nations and most other global organizations, they are organized according to the world order that appeared after the Second World War. For instance, look at the United Nations Security Council. It does have China as a member, of course, and that is very good. But we cannot have a Security Council without the second largest nation of the world, namely India. I've had this position for many, many years. I've spoken publicly about it. And we need also to adapt to other realities in the world. Look at Africa, look at Brazil, which is also coming up as a great power. So the Security Council is only one example on how we have to adapt to these new realities. If the global organizations are not able to do this, then they will simply be more and more irrelevant, and others will take over. Not only states and state actors, but also non-state actors that are being stronger and stronger at the international arena. So United Nations, if United Nations are to regain power, then they have to adapt to this new reality. So what I said is I strongly support what President Obama said, and again, he proves that he takes the leadership as a world leader.
Another question?
I am Katya Kantor, and student here at the Harvard Kennedy School. We met this morning, Mr. Secretary General. Thank you for this excellent presentation, and thank you for promoting human rights cause here in the US. Actually, I'm from Moldova, and in Europe, Council of Europe actually is the main organization on human rights, protecting human rights, which includes all countries, and sometimes is the only avenue for countries to seek remedies, for people to seek for their human rights. Actually, from here, I wanted to make a remark that human rights is just at the very beginning, to be honest, in this continuum on promoting human rights. And very often, human rights are perceived by dictators, but those who don't want to seek to protect their citizens' rights, just as an instrument of more powerful nations as a leverage against them. And why is that happening? Why is this cause weakened, very much weakened? It's by sometimes the more powerful nations don't abide, don't ratify agreements, even if they generally protect their human rights at home. So I don't want to name here some countries because there are many cases, but the course on human rights, in my personal view, is very, very much weakened by this, because they say this is just an instrument. They are using it against us. If they can do this, why we need to follow? In addition to that, human rights is very, very often seen as the issue on the bottom of the agenda, because we have some other issues to do, and they start to imply some cultural relativism and stuff like that. So what do you think international community could do in order to unify, to get a more converged effort in order to address these issues?
Well, I'm aware of this argument that some are using, and actually it's worrying that they're using it more and more, and it has come very much to the surface after we gave the prize to Liu Xiaobo, and the arguments being used in China that we are, so to say, we are promoting Western values, and that we are dividing the world between the Western countries and the others. I think this is because they dislike to be under international obligations and to be reminded that they are under the same obligations as all others. So therefore they are making this case that we are dividing the world and playing on this. But it is a problem, as you indicated, that also nations that we call, that are part of what we call the Western world also, are not the best pupils in the class. So I would like to have seen, for instance, this country should have adhered to many of the important international institutions that we have, for instance, the International Criminal Court, which is a very important and strong instrument in today's world. I dislike very much that you still have capital punishment in this country, because we Europeans, we have abolished it all in every country, and we see this as a part of civilizing the world. So, I mean, there are many things that I don't like in this country and many other Western countries, but what I like is that there is freedom of expression, that you have a free press, that you have checks and balances in your political system. We can discuss it. That is what many of the others are trying to avoid by saying that, oh, you are interfering in our businesses, and you are only doing that with those who are not a part of the Western world, which is not true. They dislike to be under these international obligations. That's a true story, I think.
Thank you, Secretary General. My name is Henry Yin, and I'm a senior at Harvard College. I wanted to ask you about Liu Xiaobo specifically, and were you aware of potential consequences that giving him the award may cause within China in the short run, if not the long run? And how did that weigh in your awarding the decision, in your making the decision to give the award to him?
Yes, indeed, we were aware of this. We had expected it, but we could not let this guide us because of the history which I have told you about. When we have awarded human rights activists in the United States, like Dr. Martin Luther King, in Soviet Union, Andrei Sakharov, Aung San Suu Kyi, all this. And then if we didn't give the prize to a Chinese human rights activist, actually he is not a dissident. What he is defending universal rights, and that is not being a dissident. So if we didn't dare to do this because he belonged to the most powerful nation in the world, then I think the committee would have lost authority. So, and the committee has to be totally independent. We could not look to the interests of our own country, which has been harmed by this decision, but we couldn't look to this. We have to take into account what is the will of Alfred Nobel on how we look upon peace and the connection between peace and human rights.
My name is Yang Jianli. I'm from China. I'm also a human rights activist. I just 2 days ago I was invited to go to the award ceremony next month. I'll see you there. Thank you for coming here. And actually, Liu Xia, his wife, designated me as a representative to organize activities related to the award ceremony. Just a few days before, she was totally cut off. So probably this time would be the first time in the history of Nobel Peace Prize, neither the laureate nor his family, nor a representative to receive the award. And so, of course, I have been in communicating with Mr. Gaia Landstedt for the proceedings. But I want to ask you a question: what's in your mind? You want to do it? You will how the ceremony will proceed without the laureate, his family, and the representative?
Well, Liu Xiaobo, he will be there through his texts. He has written a lot of things, very good texts. And somebody will read what he has written. For instance, what he said in the court when he was sentenced to 11 years in prison. And it will be a very nice ceremony, I can guarantee this. And Alan has been there, and it will be as nice as it was when President Barack Obama got the prize, and it will get a lot of attention worldwide. And that is the most important thing for those who are struggling for human rights in China.
Other questions? Yes, the lady here.
Thank you, Secretary General. My name is Westina Matthews-Shatine. I'm a fellow at the Weatherhead Center. In listening to you, I was struck that the qualities of the Peace Nobel laureate that's chosen really mirrors the qualities of the committee. So I began to write them down: courageous, visionary, passionate, committed, controversial, agitator, transformational. And I'm wondering, as a committee, in your discernment process, are you aware that you have these shared values, and did I miss any attributes in that consideration?
Well, thank you for your kind words. I think what we are doing is to, first of all, we have the basic values, which is guiding us every year. We have, of course, the will of Alfred Nobel. He wrote some very concrete things about what person should be avoided. And we look at the world how it is, what processes we want to advance, what personalities we want to support. For instance, last year, as I said, we wanted to really to advance and promote what President Obama started to do, to give a message to the world that something had to change. We could not continue with the confrontation that we had on all fronts in the world before he became president. And we also, from time to time, we honor the work that personalities and organizations have been doing during many, many years. So it's a variety of prizes that we have issued, but first of all, I think it's important to smell what is going on in the world and to look at what positive processes and outstanding personalities we want to promote and enhance.
Hi, my name is Xia Hui, and I'm also from China. I'm an undergrad here. So I would like to follow up with Henry's question. So there are many arguments about after the announcement of the award to Liu Xiaobo, basically Chinese government basically block every single message that has his name in it. So that's an example of how and also the issued statement saying that the Norwegian government is like damaging the relationship between Norway and China. So those are the things that the Chinese government can kind of twist the story. Do you think this announcing the decision actually help in terms of pragmatically within China? Do you think it actually help the cause of human rights or kind of damages it?
Well, not in the short term, but in the longer run, I think that it will influence developments in China, because we have already seen this, that before the prize was announced, most of the world leaders didn't want to talk about human rights when I met with the Chinese leaders, because they looked to their specific national interest, in particular economic interests. They didn't dare to raise human rights issues because they had become so dependent on China's economy. After the prize was announced, it is difficult for world leaders to go to China and not to ask about Liu Xiaobo and human rights situation in China, because the NGO and the civil society is playing such a big role in most nations, and they will of course ask, what are you taking up these issues when you come to China, or when Chinese leaders are coming to us? For instance, Prime Minister Cameron of UK, when he went to China now, he raised it immediately. I don't think it's only because of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, but it would have been impossible for him not to do it. So everybody will keep their eyes on China and what is going on there, much more than what was the case before this prize. Like Burma, after Aung San Suu Kyi got the prize, everybody has kept their eyes on what is going on in Burma. And it is impossible, and this is a very good example for any ruler, any undemocratic regime, that in an open world like we have today, it is impossible to keep people in prison for years and years and years. It has to come to an end. And I believe that it will come to an end before 11 years has passed.
questions?
Hi, Secretary General. Thank you for coming. My name is Chase Hu. I'm a junior at the college. And it sounded like the committee this year very much wanted to bring awareness to human rights in China. And I was just wondering, what other candidates, if any, did you consider for the prize that were involved in China?
Well, there are a number of many human rights activists in China, living inside China and also living outside China, that we considered, but we had to pick one, and it was obvious for us that we had to choose Liu Xiaobo after the sentence that was made actually on Christmas Day. After that, it was no other choice, because he has become the symbol of the human rights activists and human rights defenders in China, and he has done so much during all the years since Tiananmen in 1989.
Hi, thank you so much for being here and for your amazing address. My name is Reshma. I'm a sophomore at the college. And I was wondering, it seems to me that in the past years especially, there's been kind of a shift towards awarding the prize towards more political figures and more figures who are more involved in the government side. And so I was wondering if you could speak to the changing role of civil society and non-governmental organizations in promoting international rights and international peace, and how that's changing in the future. Thank you.
I don't think it has been a shift. We are doing what I said, namely we are looking at world events. Last year we did what we did, and that was because things that we got a president in this country that tried to change so much in international community. This year, Liu Xiaobo, we are given the prize to political leaders earlier. As I said, Willy Brandt, who was the Chancellor of Germany, West Germany at the time. He opened up for the so-called Ostpolitik, opening up dialogue with Eastern European countries. It was a big controversy, debate all over Europe because of this. And the committee was also attacked at that time. And we have a man sitting up there that can confirm what I'm saying. But today, everybody will say that this was the beginning of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And everybody will say today that, well, it was right to give the prize to such a powerful man. He was Chancellor of Bundesrepublik at the time. So there are many examples of prizes given to politicians, but the only prerequisite is that they have taken some leadership to change the world.
Very good.
To shift a little bit back to Europe, when one looks at the map of the Council of Europe, there's a very curious large hole to the northeast. It's Belarus. When you see that map, when you see the political situation there, the situation of human rights, what does it make you think about the penalty and promise of membership?
Yes. Very good question. If you look at the map, Belarus obviously belongs to Europe. Actually it's in the heart of Europe. There are several problems related to Belarus membership in the Council of Europe. One is that they are still exercising capital punishment. No country in Europe can become a member of the Council of Europe having a death penalty. this was a prerequisite when Russian Federation joined the Council of Europe. They had to adopt a moratorium in the first place, and then to promise to abolish death penalty. And they have done it. But Belarus has still now failed to do it. And I know that if they are to become a member of this organization, they have to do that, starting with a moratorium. The other thing is that Belarus is not a democracy. They don't have free elections. They don't have a free press. So that has also to be changed. But I'm quite confident that Belarus will become a member of the Council of Europe in the future. And we are working on it, and we have a dialogue with different forces and also the authorities in Belarus.
May I ask a question, if you don't mind, Mr. Secretary General? I know that this process is organic as we speak. I don't think I compromise anything by saying that you spoke just a short time ago to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, and might you elaborate a little bit on that and how it relates to the decisions and what's going on right now?
Actually, I have spoken with him 3 times only the last months. He was in Strasbourg also to participate in the 60th anniversary of the European Convention on Human Rights. And I think he clearly understands that Europe is the only place in the world where we have taken the Universal Declaration seriously. Many other nations have, of course, signed, ratified the Universal Declaration, but they don't have any instruments to see to it that it is being upheld, the obligations. We have done this on the European continent, and we have very strong instruments. And as I said earlier, the Court of Human Rights, that gives the citizens in Europe very strong instrument against their own authorities if they violate the provisions in the Human Rights Convention. And UN clearly recognize this, and they, of course, can use Europe as an example for what other regions of the world should do. And there is a strong interaction also between the Council of Europe and the UN on specific matters and issues, such as the situation in Burma, where I appreciate very much the role that Ban Ki-moon has played. He went there, and I think this was one of the reasons why the regime there at last decided to release her. And again, he spoke with her, and he is keeping in contact with us because there must be an interaction between many actors in this case.
Thank you, sir. Well, do we have time for a couple more
Yes,
questions?
of course.
And we're going to have a reception downstairs just off here afterwards. So please stay for the reception so you'll have an opportunity to meet the Secretary General. There was one more question, I think, or one or two more? 2 more? Okay.
Hello, Secretary General. My name is Lee Eui-hun. I'm from Kennedy School and I'm from Korea. I have actually 2 questions. The first one is when you awarded President Obama Nobel Peace Prize, many critics said that President Obama said a lot of good things about the peace, but he really didn't do anything to bring the peace. And I think even today the critics think President Obama still didn't do like many things to bring the peace in the world. So what could be your reaction to the critics? And my second question is, if my memory is right, the committee tries to recognize any person or organization who try to bring peace where unjust war or crimes are going on in the world. But I wonder why you are still silent the war against Iraq.
Well, when it comes to Obama, I tried to explain why he got the prize. It is not right that he hasn't obtained anything. We have the START agreement on nuclear disarmament of the strategic nuclear arms, which couldn't have been agreed upon without his initiative to reach out to the Russian Federation. So this is only this would have been sufficient to give him the prize. But he did many other things, as I said. You cannot, as the world was characterized by a lot of confrontations among the Western countries and the Muslim world, in the Middle East, of course in Iraq, in Afghanistan. And he tried to, and he went to the United Nations, and this was many years back that a US president went to the United Nations, made this speech, and he said that United States would start to pay their fees to the UN. It was, I mean, it was a great thing. And he shared the Security Council. No other president of the United States has done that as a world leader. So we took so many initiatives in trying to create a new climate in the world. And that is a prerequisite for doing other things, concrete things. There are many forces out there that dislike this, that want to have the world as it is, because that is securing their own power. For instance, in the Middle East, many of the regimes that we have in the Middle East don't want to have the peace, because this is threatening to their own regimes. Like in Europe, when peace came to Europe, that happened actually when the Berlin Wall came down. Then the Second World War was over, and it launched a revolution on the whole continent. And this would happen also in many parts of the world if reduction of tensions is arriving or peace is arriving. So there are so many strong forces out there that do not find any interest at all in the messages that were given by Barack Obama. But we, as the Nobel Committee, we wanted to enhance his efforts.
This question here, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. My name is Bernard Metz. I'm a graduate student at Harvard Kennedy School. And I've got a question in the context of Europe again. You mentioned Turkey before, which is a member of your institution, but not a member of the other institution, which is partly based in Strasbourg and shares the same flag as you, the European Union. And there are many of the opponents of the Turkish membership of the European Union base their criticism on issues in the context of human rights, democratic institutions, and so on. And I just had the question, based on your experience in the framework of the Council of Europe, do you see Turkey on a good track towards the Copenhagen criteria, or in general towards a membership to the European Union and towards fulfilling those criteria? Thank you.
I can definitely say yes to this. What the party of Prime Minister Erdogan has done in Turkey is nearly unbelievable. He has passed a lot of reforms. He has brought Turkey closer to Europe, under the same standards and values and under the same court as all other nations in Europe. And so he is, in a way, but there is a long way to go. But they are going in the right direction because of his willingness to adapt to the European standards. I don't know whether Turkey will become a full member of the European Union. That is another case, because this is such a huge country. And maybe it will be like we did in Norway. We voted against membership in the European Union. And I will not exclude that if Turkey is get an agreement with the European Union to accede fully to the Union, that Turkish people will say no, we don't know. But this is the democracy, and the fact is that they are moving in the right direction. And I would like to say also that this is to a large extent underestimated in the West, particularly in some big European countries. They have done a big mistake by trying to, so to say, to keep this on hold, because Turkey is so important for our neighborhood, and there can be a bridge, but as Prime Minister Erdogan said to me the last time I went with him in his helicopter to Srebrenica, and he said to me, they are saying in Europe and that we shall be a bridge between Europe and the Orient. And he said, how can I be that? Or only to be on the one side of the river. You have to have the pillars on both sides of the river, and that is what they're trying to do. And they cannot agree on everything and do everything we want them to do in Europe and United States. Then they are not a bridge. They have to have legitimacy also on the other side of the river, or the Bosphorus, of course. So I think that Turkey can play a very important role for the United States and for Europe vis-à-vis the region that is causing continuous problems for us with regard, for instance, to terrorism in the Middle East, in the Orient.
Well, Spoonfill, I think that brings us to a close. Let us thank our distinguished guests of honor. I can say that we've worked him very hard today. We started off with a breakfast with scholars at the Center for European Studies, then followed that with a Fairbanks Institute meeting with scholars on China, then with a faculty luncheon, and of course, following a meeting with President Faust, this wonderful gathering. And I hope that you are somewhat rested. You've been most gracious to all of our students and faculty, and we thank you for that, sir. So again, let us thank you.